Welcome back. Well, there's still many different aspects of our election and the results and the move to coalitions that I suspect is going to keep us talking for quite a few months. So many things have happened. Jacob Zuma's MK won a big share of the vote. The EFF went down slightly. Their DA moved up just a little bit. But perhaps the most dramatic figure is that of the ANC, falling from 57% to just over 40%. Professor Stephen Chan is a professor of world politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Professor Chan, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. What we can sometimes miss amid all of the noise and the smoke and the claims is that we have a governing party in South Africa that has lost a majority, gone down to 40%, is not at all challenging the election results. In fact, its leader, as president last night, stood up and told people everyone must accept the results. How significant is that?
It was a very statesmanlike speech, urging people to respect the democratic outcome of the elections. And it puts them in a position of equivalence to other world leaders who are also running coalition governments. Germany, for instance, has long had coalition governments. So it shows a mark of maturity that he's able to say that South Africa has moved from a dominant party to a mixed party system. Now, how to negotiate the wherewithals of this mixed party system, that's going to be a real test of statesmanship.
Is it vitally important in our democracy that a governing party agrees to give up power? I mean, there was a time when people used to be very concerned about this. That concern seems to have just vanished, but I think at 40% you can't really contest it, can you?
You can't contest it. They were hoping for more, of course, in which case they would have been in a driving seat much more than they are now. At 40%, you've actually got to swallow hard and basically come out and say, OK, we're ready to talk. And that's exactly what he did. As I said, the international community will regard this as a statesman-like action on his part.
Is there a lesson for other parties as well? And there may be all sorts of subtle questions in my question, that if the ANC accepts a result they don't like, other parties need to accept it too if they don't like the result that they got?
They should, because other parties claiming that the result was not fair and dishonest have shown no evidence to back up their claims. So it's just rhetoric, and basically, as far as I could see, all your electoral processes were sound. One or two small glitches here or there would not have altered the overall result. So the disposition of the parties is such that they can now begin seriously to negotiate towards a coalition. Everyone should accept these results.
Have there been many coalitions? I mean, everyone talks about how our electoral system will drive us towards coalitions. People talk about Germany and Europe. Not many people compare our system to the system in the rest of our continent in Africa. I think Mauritius has had a coalition in the past, if I remember, one or two other countries. Are there many examples to point to on our continent of coalitions?
No, not in Africa. But South Africa is unique in this, among many other things, of course. The negotiation of the constitution and the disposition of power after the end of apartheid meant that you had to have a system of this sort so that the former national party, that was the government, could legitimately claim some role in government, some presence in parliament. So it made room for outliers, if you like. Everyone could participate. Now, you can't do away with that. And of course, the danger is that you do have to anticipate coalitions. It's taken 30 years for this to happen. Now, that is a product of the constitutional settlement way back in 1994.
There are many voices to change that settlement. And to me, it seems that when countries negotiate a constitution or change the rules of the game, that's usually after a period of conflict or coming out of a period of oppression, whether it be a dictatorship or apartheid. It's actually very hard for a democracy to change the rules of the game at a time when no political party is dominant.
Look, when that constitution was brought into existence, I wrote a lengthy article saying, this is the finest constitution in the world. And I stand by that. It's progressive, the equalities that it gives to everybody. It was such a major change from the days of apartheid when there was no equality. So why change a constitution when you're leading the world with it, just for the sake of some temporary advantage? Basically, this is a stage where South Africa has got to perhaps bite its teeth, suck in its breath, but realize it's entering a different phase. How it does that, with what grace it does that, will mark out how mature the leaders of political parties now are.
I think many people are watching the situation around Umkhonto we Sizwe very closely. He's had former President Jacob Zuma speaking outside the High Court in Johannesburg just a few moments ago and making claims that the elections were stolen. I have to keep pointing this out. He has not verified these claims. There's no evidence that's been submitted that I'm aware of. And I think people are concerned about, I suppose, a threat of violence. We kind of need to call this what it is. We've seen other democracies deal with parties where certain leaders have a strong level of support. The greatest example, of course, is Donald Trump, whose supporters did inflict violence in quite an awful way. Several police officers were killed in Washington in 2021. Are there particular ways that democracies can deal with these moments?
These moments are few and far between. You've got to deal with them one by one. There's no prescription for how to deal with them. Having said that, I mean, Zuma in his speech just now did ask his followers not to resort to violence. So to that extent, it's a winding in of his horns from the speech he made at the counting centre at the Rock just very, very recently. So even they are ameliorating their position. There's a lot of time, it seems a short time, 14 days from now, before Parliament has got to convene. There's a lot of negotiation that is going to have to take in Zuma. I'm sure overtures are already being made. And of course, he's got to accept the results, otherwise he can't take power, his party can't take power in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's a case of what deal can become into being with the MK party in the national parliament. A lot of frantic talking might perhaps be already underway at this moment in time.
One of the things we've seen that this maybe doesn't play into, but let me sort of continue my thought, is that we've seen more recently more cause for separatism in some way. In the Western Cape, there's a political party that calls itself the Referendum Party, that basically wants the Western Cape to be independent. Let's just be clear, it'll never happen. In KwaZulu-Natal, we've actually seen Palani Mavundla, his Bantu Batu Congress. They didn't do very well from what I can see. They also say that there should be a kingdom of KwaZulu that should be completely independent. And South Africa, and you point to the settlement that we had, a sort of mixture of a national state with powers for provinces. And I wonder if in a country like this, with such inequality, there's a risk if some provinces are almost allowed to be too different to the rest of the country. You know, that, and I accept that different regional areas will have some regional differences. In places like Spain, this has become a major problem. Is there a risk that if you allow provinces to be too different, those calls for separatism, I mean, it's what drove Brexit, which you'll be very familiar with, that you need to manage that quite closely. You need to keep South Africa together, I suppose, is my point.
You do have to keep it together. Each province, of course, has its cultural identity. That doesn't make it a separate national identity. Key difference there. I watched very, very closely the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. That was said to be a major player in European politics. Now it's a number of different countries. None of them has got any real throw weight in European politics. Right now, as a united South Africa, you mean something in Africa, you mean something in the world. Why throw that away for the sake of some very, very narrow-minded idea of what your provincial role should be?
It's a comment about the sort of nation state. I mean, are there resonances with what you've seen in our election, the commentary, what people like former President Zuma are saying? Resonances between that and what we've seen in other democracies recently? I find this fascinating. I mean, because democracies are transparent and because information flows between them, what you see in one, you start to see resonances in another?
There are all kinds of, as it were, international fashions, and this is perhaps one of them. Separatism, we've got the Scottish people in Great Britain, for instance, making similar noises in a very, very well-organized way. They at least have their own parliament, and it's unlike a provincial government as such. They've actually got quite sweeping powers beyond a provincial government here. So if you are going to be talking about going your own way, you better be ready for it. Running a nation is pretty difficult, particularly running a nation in the world at large. What is happening in the world at large is savage competition. There's no mercy right now. The Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, just the tip of an iceberg of great competitiveness. If South Africa doesn't keep its place at the table of this international competitiveness, the whole country and all the different bits of it are just going to sink.
So it's actually very important for us to speak with a unified voice, even when we disagree on something like Gaza, for example. South Africa needs to be unified.
Look, the world disagrees on Gaza as a whole. It's one of the great tragedies of the day, but you do have to stick together. South Africa is powerful. Now look, what is the second most powerful country in sub-Saharan Africa? That's Nigeria. Many different states. These states, federal states, have got sweeping powers of their own. No one anymore is talking about separatism because they know that Nigeria together punches above its weight. And that's an example, although I know Nigeria has a bad press here in South Africa, that's an example to South Africa. Two countries that could punch above their weight in international politics by staying together.
How do you think the next 5 years are going to go for South Africa? If you look at the different trends, I realize it's a big question. But, I mean, a lot will happen in the next 2 weeks. You say it's a long time, doesn't feel like it. But that will obviously be very important. It would seem also, in a way, hard to imagine the ANC coming back from this and increasing its share of the vote. And so this idea of sort of a biggish party being 20 or 30% rather than what we've seen in the past suddenly becomes very real.
This is where the other big parties need to embrace the idea of a coalition, go into some kind of cooperative government, then do their absolute best during the next 5 years to show that the stars of the show in government. Because you're quite right, what is going to happen in 5 years' time, 2029, that is when history is going to be made, because that is the moment when figures in a coalition government now could make a legitimate claim and say they were the best members, the best functioning members of the coalition. Now let us be the national government. So if I were the leader of a political party now, I would embrace the chance to become part of a coalition so I could show off in government.
People showing off in government, I don't know if that's what we need. We do need that, but I take your point. Professor Stephen Chan, thank you very much indeed. Professor of World Politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London.